Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Ex Machina? Stick around and find out. Cha-chung, chung, cha-chung. Cha-chung, chung, cha-chung. Bwa 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 bwa. Cha-chung, chung, cha-chung, chung, chung. Bwa bwa. I don't know. I couldn't think of another like AI based movie that would have a memorable theme or something. Anyway. Okay, so I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here with my uncut review of Ex Machina. Now, I know this one hasn't been out for, it's been out for a while. I originally was going to see Midnight Special today, but it's a very limited release, and it wasn't showing in any local theaters, so I'm going to have to wait on that. But I did finally get around to seeing Ex Machina, and I was able to do so because of the services of vidangel.com, which I would highly recommend. I avoided this movie for a long time, because in doing some research about it, as I try to do whenever there's, I'm going to see an R movie, I want to avoid nudity because it has negative effects on me. Yeah, I won't get into that. There's a video I put on here on like what's wrong with nudity and sexuality and fantasies in entertainment that I hope you'll check out to kind of get maybe some insight on how nudity can be bad for us, even if we don't feel like it's affecting us negatively at the time that we're exposed to it. So anyway, that's the reason I avoided this movie for a long time. But then recently I was bombarded by ads from VidAngel, well, as I've been watching other YouTube videos, and I was like, oh, this looks like a cool service. It allowed me to filter out all the instances of nudity, and so I was able to watch the movie, and there was only one point at which I was like, I missed something here. So I went back and turned off the filters and just kind of kept track of the scene through my peripheral vision for most of the time, and realized, oh, okay, this is there's major dialogue going on during this scene while this woman is sitting there naked. So, but anyway, and then I put the filters back on and was able to enjoy the rest of the movie without getting lost or anything. So, this is a decent movie. The synopsis basically is that an employee of a technology firm, possibly in the near future, we're not really clear on that, is awarded by lottery within his company a week with the company's secluded billionaire. The owner of the company, who's developing AI in secret and hopes to use this employee who's come out to visit him for a week to test it. So let's talk about the story and the script and the pacing. It's a sci-fi drama, so it's slow and thoughtful and philosophical in a predictably limited way. More on that later. It's fairly dependent, the drama and I think your engagement with it is fairly dependent on you caring about the AI character Ava, and what becomes of her, as well as the young employee Caleb who's interacting with her, and it's also dependent on you believing that a fairly normal man like Caleb would be attracted to a robot with a few convincing female parts, rather than totally weirded out by the fact that, okay, her arms and legs and like most of her head are mechanical. I think that premise of a guy like being interested in a machine like that, I think it only kind of works in a movie. I think that there'd be a significant adjustment period. Even if like you're dealing with a person who's actually a woman, and like, all they have is like prosthetic limbs, I think there's a period of adjustment. There's some things you have to kind of let go of in order to become romantically interested. I think most guys, you're just going to have to kind of let go of kind of some of your physical desires. So anyway, the premise, I think, is one that like largely just works in a movie. So let's talk about the cast a little bit. Alicia Vikander, if that's how you pronounce her name, I'm not sure. I mean, she does fine as the AI Ava character. Personally, I didn't feel like her raspy voice fit well. But then again, I just tend not to like the sound of people that have raspy voices that sound like they've spent a lot of their years as a cheerleader or just yelling at people. It just kind of makes me, I don't know, there are very few people. I can think of one friend whose wife, I'm like, oh no, her voice is fine, but everybody else that has a raspy voice, at least in movies, I'm like, oh, that's making me feel, I don't know. It's just a thing. I felt like her performance was fine, though. It was kind of like a subtle Data from Star Trek type of performance, but with a few more emotions in the mix. Nothing world-shaking. I know she did win an Oscar, but I don't think it was for this. I'd be surprised if it was. Anyway, Domhnall Gleeson, I've seen him in a few movies recently. One was crap, was it called Out of Time or About Time? I think it was called About Time, a time travel romance, which I would highly recommend. Really, really great stuff. But anyway, I've been seeing him pop up in a few movies lately, and I've been enjoying watching him. I think he's a solid actor, and he was a great choice for Caleb, the young employee in this movie. Although I felt that it was hard for me to relate to some of his choices, as I mentioned earlier, and as I'll maybe get to through my other comments later on. But I thought his performance was good. And then Oscar Isaac, who I've really been fascinated by ever since I saw him in Sucker Punch. He's great as Nathan, the secluded billionaire genius who's created this AI. He's repulsive and fascinating at the same time. I mean, Oscar Isaac, except for in Star Wars where he was given nothing to work with virtually, he's a really engaging actor to watch. Excuse me. Okay, so stunts, visuals. The visual effects in this movie are quiet, and largely about replacing the AI characters' limbs with mechanical ones, but the look is pretty convincing, and it does a lot, I think, for the experience. So the visual effects are great, but I mean, and it is a visual effects movie, but it's not like, it's not, what you would typically think of when you think of a visual effects movie. But what I really want to get to in the meat of this is the relevance section. In other words, is there anything in this that's of spiritual, moral, philosophical significance that might, bring about some worthwhile thought or conversation after watching this? I think absolutely, although in a way that to me is kind of tiresome. I mean, where to begin with this topic? I hope to do, in the not too distant future, an entire video on the subject of AI, and I will try not to repeat too much material in both of these videos. I'm going to end up repeating some, just because there's a lot I feel like that needs to be said about this topic, even just to discuss this movie that nobody that I know of is saying as they're talking about these AI concept stories, So movies about AI, even smaller, more artistic ones and thoughtful ones like Ex Machina, almost all seem to have the same core conflict that's intended for the audience member, and that is, can an AI potentially be a person like you and I are persons, or people. The waters are usually muddied in these kinds of stories by sticking to, and in conversations about this subject, by sticking to that vague and flexible phrase, artificial intelligence, and the way that those words are used is very broadly and sloppily, I think, artificial and intelligence both. And we're, in some ways we're still kind of nailing down what intelligence is, but personhood is what I think all these movies are really getting at, and I think we'd be better off having conversations about these movies and asking the question, okay, is this a person? Not is it intelligent or an AI or whatever. Is it or even consciousness? Is it a person? Is, I think, maybe more helpful language to use. And without exception that I can think of, all AI stories that pose this question try to make you care about the well-being of an AI as they are examining or exploring this question. They give human-like characteristics that are cute in the case of Star Wars droids, or innocent or fragile in some way, or they try to trigger compassion in us as we suspend disbelief to enter into the experience. Even Nathan, the billionaire who created the AI in this movie, he didn't want to hear Caleb's intellectual analysis of the Ava AI. He was like, no, forget all that. I don't want your analysis. I want to know, how do you feel about her? How do you feel about her? As though his feelings were the most important factor in determining whether or not she was a real person, as though our perception of reality is equal to that which is real. But we don't have perfect perception, and so, and reality does not conform to what I perceive. If I'm walking across the street and I look both ways and I don't see that bus coming, that bus is still going to kill me. So our perception does not equal reality. So anyway, moving on here, the Turing test. The Turing test is a central concept of the movie. Now, this is a real test developed by Alan Turing in 1950, and there was a movie called The Imitation Game made about him, which I thought was pretty good. And And it was developed by Turing with the goal of evaluating a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human being. The problem is that people think of the Turing test as something capable of identifying something as being a person in the same sense that you and I are. And I don't think even Turing intended it to be that. But I think in kind of pop culture, that's how it's used. It's really elevated up there. But really, in like actual scientific circles, this is a highly debated and questioned and criticized test, and the capabilities of this test are highly criticized. In reality, all this test does is measure how much something might seem like a person. And again, we can't just decide what is real based on our ability to perceive, okay? Because our immediate perception is very limited. To evaluate whether or not a machine can have personhood, we first have to agree on what personhood is. And we don't. At least in the real world, we don't. Most AI-themed movies take a materialistic approach, as though that is the default, that is the only option. We're not even going to bring in any other concept of what a human is as an option. So in the materialistic view, human consciousness or personhood is defined solely in physical terms. A dualistic approach suggests that there is both a physical and non-physical component to who we are, and that our consciousness, while interacting with our physical being, our brain, our synapses, there's and all those kinds of things, there's a correlation certainly that we can see, but a dualistic approach would say that does not necessarily mean that our consciousness, our being, who we are, is limited to those physical realities, and that it is actually non-physical, at least in part, and can therefore not be reproduced by physical, purely scientific means. So those who want to use the Turing test as kind of proof of personhood, of the personhood of a machine, are limiting their understanding of reality to only that which the scientific method can tell them. But the discipline of science isn't equipped to reveal everything that's true, everything that is real. Only what is physically true at best, in accordance with, repeatable, observable phenomenon. This kind of anti-supernatural bias that most of these AI movies start with is certainly popular even among those who would consider themselves spiritual, but it doesn't make logical sense to rule out non-physical realities before your investigation of truth even begins. Now, there's an interesting turn at the end of this movie that makes it a little more open-ended than most of these movies are. I'm not going to spoil it. But the movie never recognizes the potential for man to have non-physical being. And so it limits and kind of funnels our conclusions like almost every other story of this kind. My favorite treatment of AI may be the new Battlestar Galactica series that was on a few years back, which allowed for the possibility that while man created the Cylons, God intervened and granted them souls. Now, whether this is true or not is, I think, mostly left up to the viewer to decide. They do some wonky stuff in the last episode of that series, but I try to pretend that most of that episode doesn't exist because that series ended horribly in that last episode. But I think for most of the series, they kind of leave that up to the viewer to decide, okay, did God really do this, or are they just saying that, or whatever? But they're acknowledging this non-physical component to who humans are, or at least acknowledging the possibility of that. And AI stories outside of that, they just don't, kind of like in, what was that, Johnny Depp movie, Transcendence or something like that, where he was uploaded into a computer when in reality nothing really gets uploaded. We just copy the file and then we delete the original. So the copy, it's not the original. Anyway, so I'm not going to spoil this movie for you, but those are basically my thoughts. Oh yeah, that's right. If you want to, like, another movie that I would recommend is Imposter with Gary Sinise. I highly recommend checking it out in light of the topic of AI. I can't tell you why I recommend checking it out because it would spoil it for you, but if you haven't seen Imposter with Gary Sinise and you're interested in how sci-fi treats AI as a topic, definitely go check that one out. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are, so I'll just imagine if I were a time travel, what would I say to myself if I were to travel back in time? I'd say, Peter, skip it, skip it. it's got a different tone than lots of other AI movies, but it's well acted, well made, but it's another AI story trying to make you care about a toaster and not giving you any reasons other than what they try to manipulate you into feeling. Call me cold-blooded. But when it comes to examining questions about the nature of humans, the worth of humans, who we are, I would rather pursue truth about that topic outside of fiction, rather than limit my pursuit of truth in that topic to fiction, where really their end game is to engage you by getting you to feel something and to follow your heart. And following our heart is not a reliable way to discover that which is true. We're much better off trying to use our minds for that. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Where's my sign? You can also support this channel by visiting spiritblade.com and seeing the goodies that we have for you there. And then I hope that, boom, I forgot to say like, share, subscribe. If you like this video, want to share it, and want more videos like it. Then boom, visit christiangeekcentral.com for a ton more content and community. I hope you join us there soon as we continue to seek out, geek out. Dang it. I was trying to get the button ready. Geek out and seek the truth.